they wouldn't be able to make today's session. So we've got that recording on. So if there's anybody that misses the session today, we're happy to send this out. But we're super excited about the data talk today and the ability to improve the value of the customer record that we all talk about in banking and payments. And we're talking really about alternative data and staying in that trust zone. So just a couple of agenda and housekeeping items today. Please mute your line and just until we get to the audience Q&A portion. Definitely welcome you staying on camera if you want to help us, just if you want to put your cameras on, that's absolutely fine, but we also understand if you choose not to. As I mentioned, we're recording, and we're going to also try and take some time towards the end of today's session for remaining audience Q&A. So we will open up for some live questions. You're welcome to chat those in ahead of time. If you think of things and don't want to try and hold those to the end, Kelly will be helping with some of the chat questions coming through there. So feel free to use that feature too. So with that said, I think as we get ready to kind of talk a little bit about why we're here and what we're up to, Kairos as a new dimension of consulting firm, but what Kairos really means, and I thought was really relevant for today, is that it's a Greek word for the time is now. So we talk a lot about, the time to act. There's jump time, there's opportunities in our fast-pacing industry, and there's a special moment that sometimes we either seize or we miss in our business. And Kairos time as a Greek word is really actually slippery. It constantly changes. We know that it dates back to ancient times where really observation and critical thinking without all of the great technology that we have today and data was essential to navigate that path of life for people in those ancient times. But it really has today very interesting meanings and context around archery and weaving. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that, because what Kairos is doing in our mission and vision is that we're focused in on specific openings of time where there's a time similar to an archer where he has to make his arrow pass to hit the mark, to meet the test of what Kairos is described as fine precision and the force to drive an arrow all the way through to a bullseye. And in the art of weaving, we find really relevance to, it's the time where the weaver really has to pull on the threads through a gap that opens to weave fabric that's really being woven for, the face of technology. It could be all kinds of contextual uses. And why do I really talk about that in today's session about data? And I thought was important is that we all sense a disruption that's occurring in our space. We know and we hear the noise around our brands and diluted attention of our audience and the many dimensions of life that consumers really have when they're choosing how to merge their financial or retail decisions with the balance of what they need or want in their life, or struggles and things around their financial needs. So I think what's weaving around all of this data, these decisions, is data. And so it could be a targeted offer, it could be an engaging email, or a meaningful product that we're all trying to build that's really similar to something that we're competing with. The action of an archer, however, aims his bow and arrow and releases that arrow, shooting through the air towards a bullseye. And so that's what we're really talking about today, is that customer record, trying to get closer to the customer themselves, understand them. We have this record, we have their behavior, we have some of their data, but how do we do more with it using alternative data sources? So today we're really excited to kick off the start to our Data Table Talk series. And alternative data that we're going to talk about today could be seen as a weaving of individual threads of every customer interaction and every consumer choice to help the kinds of businesses that each of you guys represent today to better understand the consumers of tomorrow and create or deliver meaningful products and services to solve for gaps and challenges that our industry is facing or that your business is trying to grow towards. So with that, we're going to get started today, but I really think that today's an opportunity to help you kind of elevate your view, take a different look at data. That's what our panelists are here to talk to you about today, and maybe come to a way that we can better understand the customer. So it's really my pleasure and honor to introduce our panel for today's session. On camera, we have Jeff Sopko, who's the Chief Strategy Officer at Audience Acuity. Audience Acuity and Kairos has partnered to really drive data-driven consulting opportunities through our consulting firm. But Jeff is responsible for driving the corporate strategy and growth initiatives across his organization, really focused on the development of new solutions to expand channels and vertical markets. He has over 25 years of experience in corporate leadership, marketing strategy, technology innovation, consulting and marketing services, and is integral to the corporate development, growth, and innovation across the business units. He's been recognized as Executive of the Year by Loyalty 360 and is a board member and advisor to both established and startup companies. And we've been having a lot of fun really studying this industry with Jeff and teaching him more about banking and payments. And Chris Alleline has joined us as Audience Acuity's Chief Data Officer. So we're really excited to have Chris with us today. He's bringing more than 25 years of consumer data and target marketing leadership as well, and experience to Audience Acuity, and really has overseen, I think, all aspects of data-driven business, including acquisition of data, data sourcing, audience development, data privacy, identity matching, and data linkage operations for both offline and digital enterprises. So talk about data gurus. We're really excited to have you with us, Chris. And thank you for taking the time to join us. And then last but certainly not least, we have Steve Moynihan, who is president of Moynihan Sales and Marketing Solutions, a fellow consulting practice that we are excited to be partnered with as well. And Steve practices in his consulting firm early stage advertising and marketing technology strategies with sales, go-to-market planning, and frontline sales. But what I love about Steve is that his particular focus in his career path has been on the consumer data space, working with several companies outside and inside of the data ecosystem. His background is in sales, marketing strategy, consulting, and ad agency experience. So I think he really has this great 360-degree view of the advertising and marketing ecosystem and has touched so many facets of the industry that we all work in. So Steve, thank you as well for joining us. So absolutely. With that, we are excited to, hopefully you guys all have your mics on and turned on. So I have a few questions for you. So we're gonna plan for about 40 minutes roughly, maybe a little bit less for the panel discussion, and then we'll open up for audience Q&A. But don't forget to submit some of those questions if you don't wanna hold them into the chat, and Kelly can help you with some of those as well, or we'll hold them to the end. So with that said, I think we'll go ahead and get started. But one of the things I wanted to kick us off with is we talk a lot about risk, compliance, and protection of data in our industry. And certainly this is an important area in our space. But as we shift to thinking about the customer record to the panel, I wonder sometimes if the teams that are on the phone kind of ask themselves, like, what can we really do to engage and better understand the customer beyond the data that's sitting inside the four walls of the bank or the application, and really start thinking about preferred and target audiences, how diverse our panel, and the diversity that you guys have. What, in your opinion, is critical to building hyper-personalized consumer messages, engagement campaigns, or product offerings? Anybody can start.
Yeah, so I'll jump in here. I mean, I think that, there's a lot of challenges with respect to understanding a customer. I think in our business, so we're enterprise identity management company, and our charter is really helping organizations sort of get beyond this, what we see as an identity mandate, if you will, or almost an identity crisis that's taking place as through the evolution of people and technology. So if you think of there's more ways today for a consumer to engage with a brand, there's more channels, there's more devices, there's all of these things that take place. Yet historically, brands, banks, financial institutions really just know the customer from a single dimension. And so, when we think of that, that's a pretty daunting challenge, right? I mean, it oftentimes sounds expensive to expand, beyond that single view. And so, when we think about that, is that, what can we bring to bear, and how can organizations expand that view and really be able to enhance that core record, and maybe put aside what they think are the traditional constraints around what technology won't let you do, because that's a big, in talking to Connie, it's always, hey, our core system doesn't allow us to do these things, or we don't have the information inherently available to change some of those experiences and drive higher levels of personalization, et cetera. But, as Connie said, the time is now. There's too many other outside market factors that are, whether it's, that are coming into play, that are requiring that, that people think differently about the data they have, the customer they understand, the insights that they're currently creating to be able to achieve different things.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just kind of jump on what Jeff was saying.
Go ahead, Steve.
So I think the key here, Connie, as you were talking about kind of better understanding your customers, I think it's understanding them outside of the four walls of the financial institution is really important. So, better understanding kind of, like intent, motivation, interest, those types of things, as you start to understand those types of things from your customers, you can start to better personalize the messaging and start to better understand kind of their need state. So again, understanding, for example, maybe some life stage information around them, that might be like signals for future financial needs. Hey, I'm going to need a bigger house soon because, I'm thinking about having kids or whatever that might be. So I think, that's really important. I think it's also really important to really keep a pulse on kind of shifting consumer behavior too. I mean, I'll address the elephant in the room of COVID. If you think about how COVID has changed consumer behavior in a lot of categories, and if you think about kind of financial institutions as a retail category, there may, kind of pre-COVID, you may have had a huge percentage of your customers who would come into a branch or come into a physical location to kind of transact their needs, and they would meet with your employees in person and build a relationship and all of those types of things. And COVID's really changed that. I mean, it's shifted a lot of people to transacting everything digitally and online. So you don't have that kind of in-person touch or that personal relationship that you might have had before. So kind of finding ways to how to make that connection or better understand what those needs are is really important to, not only, customer satisfaction, but growing your business with those customers as well too.
And Steve, you raised, the COVID situation specifically is we saw 10 years of growth in digital channels and interaction in a number of months in the lockdown. When we had all of the pandemic was at its peak. So I think that's a very valid point, and I'm glad that you addressed it.
Yeah, I mean, I have a retail client who, basically pre-COVID, they're a restaurant, and pre-COVID, only about 10% of their business was takeout and delivery. It's now 40%, and that number hasn't changed any over the past couple of months. I mean, it's just significantly shifted the dynamic of how their customers want to interact with the brand. So I think, there's a lot of those trends that I'm sure that are consistent in the banking and financial industry as well.
Yeah. And I think it's fundamentally shifted for the long term. So, I mean, what we thought might be temporary is now that they've been kind of forced onto the new technology, now it's even more important to be contextually accurate and understand that customer behavior for the long term. So that's just an expectation, and the bar has been raised. I think as we move into the next kind of question that I had was really around the data structure. So Chris, maybe, one of the things we hear from the financial institutions that we talk to and really service providers is we hear the terms disparate data. We hear, I am on a quest for the single source of truth. I have all of these disparate data feeds, and it's a systemic challenge that is really hindering so many teams from, these growth objectives to, sell more products or to be more cross-selling, friendly, have an expanded, contextually accurate of the view for loyalty and solutions like that, that might be promoting offers. And we hear about dependencies on service providers or third-party vendors or extended product delivery times and getting things to market or increasing operational costs. What is your view of master data management in the age of cloud and SaaS-based solutions?
Yeah, I think the short answer is we are all for master data management solutions, whether they're cloud-based or even internal. But since you mentioned cloud and SaaS-based, there's intrinsic benefits having some of those already in place, because master data management as it is ensures an organization doesn't use multiple inconsistent versions of data, of systems, et cetera, across different operational areas. So whether or not you're on the rest side of the house, operations side of the house, or technology side of the house, all those units can be interfacing together with, especially in large organizations, with a common, technology, and that would be the master data management. And it does some things that make it helpful, whether you haven't implemented it yet, or you're thinking about it, or you're already along the line, which is that, as you mentioned, a golden record. It sort of takes the most accurate information and creates the golden record, or the truth set. So that could be, on finance side, you have billing information. On the operational side, you might have some marketing stuff, or you had different touch points, but maybe they don't have the exact same thing. If you're on the digital side of operations, you may have an email address or a phone number, but you don't actually know the mailing address. And then on another side of the business has the mailing address, but is missing some other components. So this helps merge all that together through a common linking key. It dedupes information and says, here's the master record, here's the master ID. We have all the information here. And then there's other different business units can get access to only the information that they really need, or all of it. It really depends on how you set it. But what's really cool about it going forward is the ability to, standardize a bunch of different data coming in. So it's not just the data you have, but if you want to use third-party data or any alternate data, you standardize that data so you get the best match between some other data set. Say it's a third-party consumer behavioral information we were talking about, or even contextual, saying these particular consumers like to engage digitally as opposed to offline. And that's the type of asset that a service firm might want to know, so they don't waste, become inefficient putting out mail when a consumer wants to engage in other manner. Compliance aside, with certain things that have to be dropped in mail. In addition, by linking those different pieces of information together through a standard process, it allows to use things that are future state, like artificial intelligence and some things maybe to create segments that you hadn't considered. Even on our side of the business, we get things. For instance, people ask us whether we might see a very low car payment on something, not the actual payment, but the fact that somebody owns a car that's ancient, it's 20 years old, it's been paid for, and then they have $1 million home on the other side. So we don't know where their leverage is or not in that, but that's where the data science comes in, or artificial intelligence might help to predict which side they're over leveraged on, or what else is going on. Maybe there's 2 kids in college. There's things you don't always know. But you get the single source of truth that you get by having an individual level matching system, which is obviously key for the accuracy in any financial services firms, including health, insurance. Standardizing all that data, consolidating it. There are firms that are certainly compliant already in the cloud that do it, like Amazon Web Services and IBM are fully compliant with financial services, as others. And then, of course, like I said, if you need to put it in-house for whatever particular reason, there are many tools that work with those cloud and SaaS-based services as well, internal. So I kind of look at this, and Jeff, my partner here, has certainly heard us. If you're only thinking internally and you're never going to engage with a third party, it's quite easy to take any of these what we call walled gardens and just work with them and not have to worry about it. Anytime you're going to go and then maybe work with another platform, financial platforms, you're going to move some IDs around, et cetera, then you have to think a little broader and future state and say, well, we need to be a bit agnostic. And what's the best tools for doing that? Certainly are the cloud-based ones right now, because they are like an Amazon or an IBM, et cetera. You're going to work with whom they're not dependent on just Oracle technology or Microsoft, et cetera. They're not going to force you to take something as well. So it's a matter of where you are, like on that type of chain of what it is. But the bottom line, as you mentioned, at the outset, is when you do get that golden record, or the most complete record, you're updating it and using it, and you can rely on that. It just has benefits across the entire enterprise: revenue, operations, technology, you name it, have access to the same things, and it reduces redundancy.
Yeah, and I think you touched on a lot of the areas, Chris, and thank you for that, because, some of those become operational challenges, technical debt, that organizations take on trying to sustain all of the different feeds. So I do think it's important, but I also think, the alternative sources you mentioned can be especially valued to broadening that view. So thank you for that perspective. And I think that takes us into the next question, where we really talk about this morphing of an evolution of the customer relationship has largely been transactional in banking and payments. And, as Kelly and I try to elevate the conversation, we're really trying to help. Let's move into a relational type of relationship with the customer. The banks are trying to do that. They're seeing money in and out of the account. They're seeing all these transactional, like replacement cards and loan applications, and those can be very siloed individual interactions. But aside from seeing those transactional choices, in your opinion, and this is to anybody on the panel, to understand the needs, the wants, the aspirations of that customer base without a lot of effort, time, and cost, how do alternative data sources like maybe Audience Acuity or Steve, in your opinion, assist with this? Like, what kinds of things become reality or possible realities?
So I'll take this one. So Connie, if you think back to, or it ties back to your opening statement, and when we're talking about sort of the market conditions, listen to you. So like it or not, I think there's a few things that are taking place today that are both driven by the market disruptors, right, who've entered the space, and the digital transformation that, as Steve indicated, certainly has been accelerated by the events of their last 2 years. So we kind of have this situation where banks and financial institutions, and for that matter, all consumer-facing businesses are under pressure to drive revenue, create new deposit accounts, right? If you're a bank, they're also faced with this idea of how do we curb attrition, hold on to what we have, all while being measured by this same set of new and growing consumer expectations. So these are the standards that that are facing all consumer-facing businesses. So when you take that into account, when I think of the financial institution, albeit they may be somewhat slow to adopt this idea of how do we tap into the potential, as you say, these new aspirations, this understanding the customer. I think what we have to understand is that in order to meet the moment, if you will, right, they have to deliver on this idea of this promise of both the experience economy and everything that, everything we do today, we sort of measure against another brand we dealt with in the previous day or the previous hour, et cetera. So what we see is that, the way brands that are winning today, they are really looking to do a couple things. And in the banking vernacular, I'd say it's combine the core customer data, which is, that base information on the customer and the transactional data that you stated, with data that's, with a vast set of third-party data, right? And what we see is when you combine this core information, what happens within the four walls of the brand, with what Steve alluded to is sort of this vast third-party data to widen the lens of the customer, a few things can happen, right? And so this concept can enable a few things. When I think about banks, it's like, so think of the first thing, just simply enabling customer analytics to improve the understanding, right? Improve the understanding, which provides better insights to the many dimensions of the customer. I think Chris was talking and Steve was talking about, understanding where someone's leverage is. What are these life events that are taking place inside of their world? So, that really just drives that contextual relevance and the ability to align product and experience, a journey or whatever with that customer. Super hard to do without a vast set of sort of third-party data to enhance that understanding of the customer. Secondly, when you think of what's a big growing challenge for banks is that by capturing and maintaining this third-party data or maintaining these identifiers that correlate to individual people really provides the ability to inherently reduce friction inside the bank and also improve things like digital authentication tactics that we talked about today. One of the big friction points within a bank today is this idea of, how do I solve for things like knowledge-based authentication, right? Where we have to ask these clunky questions that, you're making me, the consumer, the customer, differentiate myself from the fraudster, if you will, right? It's definitely a point of friction and not something that's ideal. Well, collecting and basically building out a larger profile of the customer can help you address this through these third-party identifiers, right? So you inherently have some of the things that can help identify and quickly address the customer experience. And then lastly, really this addition of what I think third-party data or additional data provides is some persistence around that customer view, right? That's across channels, devices. This results in better understanding and the ability to engage the consumer across the appropriate journey with that bank, right? And so that's a big thing today where you see it. We try to align, and I think it's very analogous to say, banks need to think more like retailers when they have to understand and engage their customer, right? And so that's really knowing which channel, which device, which platform, all of these other things. Because today, without the ability to stitch those together, every time, I can engage a bank through mobile, from my phone, through my desktop or my laptop, through my tablet, etc. And those are all unique experiences until I authenticate, right? And really trying to understand me across those devices, there's a real opportunity to improve the customer experience.
Yeah, and I think that's the foundation of shifting from really transactional by device to relational, to where, I know where you're coming from and what your behavior is going to be. So I think those are great examples, Jeff. Thank you. So, and I'll throw this next one to Chris and to Jeff. I think one of the things that I love most about working with Audience Acuity is, you guys have shared some really great stories about how companies outside of banking and payments that you work with today in other sectors put your data graph to use. And I thought maybe as a bit of inspiration for the product managers or the business leaders on the phone with us today, would you be willing to share maybe your favorite use case from health or retail where we know Audience Acuity is really strong?
Yeah, I've got one just recently. I think that I like. I think that's relevant. It's through one of our largest consulting firms on the planet, global. Everybody's heard of them. Accenture is the client. They have obviously a variety of clients, but the area, the sector that I help with them happens to be with some luxury type retailers who, almost similar to what we were talking about before, I have the same type of sometimes wondering, is the luxury client like an Instagram model who's just trying to look luxury, but isn't really able to afford the things? So what's their lifetime value of that customer? Or anybody who actually does go to Canyon Ranch and spends $1,000 a night on the treatments, etc., or not? So what they were looking at is, and those clients, the luxury type, are traditionally very, very guarded with their data. They can afford LifeLock and all the other things that exist out there to protect themselves from being seen and what have you. One of the things that they had asked, though, recently was how many people, and this is COVID related again, have been switching, that we've not been putting things in the mail and not getting a lot of engagement. People have been traveling. They haven't been buying a lot of the stuff, but they have been buying some things. And their main retailers were thinking, think like jewelers and high-end furniture like West Elm, and apparel and cosmetics like Chanel. They want to know how many of them are engaging. As Jeff Sopko was just recently talking about, that they don't even know. They're anonymous digitally, kicking tires maybe. They don't know what they are, but are they already customers, or are they just people who are like coming by? from a device that hasn't authenticated themselves. So what they did was they changed some of their schemas on their web properties, and some of them were media too, like on the contact side, like things like maybe it was a Rob Report or even other sites like say or apps like Stitch Fix. They are all partnered in this to examine the digital traffic they were receiving. And what they get are called mobile ad IDs and IP addresses and a hashed email address if it's there. But they didn't see the hashed email address. They just saw mobile ad ID, which is the advertising ID that your device throws off when you are online. Now, obviously, Tom, you have to log in for that, but it throws it off. It's an identifier. It's not an identity, but it's an identifier. And they wanted us to help them link those mobile ad IDs to actual people where possible, mainly one of their customers. So we weren't going to give them any new prospects, but we would tell them, yeah, this is an actual customer of yours through just sharing an ID. So we actually were able to match about 75% of the mobile ad ID traffic they had to mobile ad ID we had in our inventory. We've got about 2 billion. In that, we ended up getting about 60% of all of their mobile ad IDs were an actual person that they could then take from us profile information on. So we weren't revealing that it was Chris if it wasn't a customer to them, but we could give them insights on that from our data table that they could then identify that what they identified was about 35% of those people they thought were just coming by were actual customers. The other 65 were about were prospects or tire kickers. And so they just tried to segment that up and tried using the same information they were already collecting off the mobile ad ID to give each one a contextual experience. If they knew it was a customer, and think like Amazon, if they know it's a customer, they're going to get a benefit of it. Here's your % off, et cetera, something to use. If it wasn't a customer, they were getting some kind of incentive to become one, to then authenticate themselves and go inside. And I used Amazon as an example, as we all go out there and shop anonymously on our browsers. Amazon always pops up when you're looking for something, right? And you can go there and click. And if you're not already logged in, you'll see offers. But once you authenticate yourself and go inside, it will then say all the other potential products that are similar to that might even be a better deal. And that's a similar type of thing they're trying to do digitally. And they've been using this now successfully. These are the results I got about a month ago, but I was just hearing at the end of last week what that segmentation treatment was that they were about to start doing. So this for Accenture was a pilot. Now it's turning into a project on their consulting side to engage with us. So, but that was one I just had recently I thought was interesting, just given the fact that financial services can obviously runs a gamut, everybody needs it, but the types of products that get offered are clearly geared towards what the base need is of that consumer, whether it's additional protection or it's you're just starting out and need to get your financial health in line. So this I thought was similar, of trying to weed out those luxury customers that aren't really buyers as opposed to lookers.
Right. No, I think it's a great example, Chris. Thank you. Jeff, anything that comes to mind on your side?
Well, I mean, we do a lot of work with retail, but I'll try to tackle a health one, which is just interesting because the use case is, I think, is easily understood. So we work with a fair amount of companies in the health and insurance space, and one of the trends there, the drivers is, they go by they try to meet a standard or identify a standard called the social determinants of health. And really what that is this is the concept of, you think when an organization is trying to insure its population, whether it's a large company and providing insurance benefits to employees or any type of organization, they need to be able to try to understand the insurability and the cost associated with that. And so, individualized person-based third-party data graph like ours helps people understand, and we can, they can tap into the data set to understand this determinants of health. So these are things like, using geolocation, being able to understand where people live and what is around them, their access to things like recreation and sports, and their access to gyms, etc. And some of the other things that that may pull away from what could be sort of scored as or quickly understood as someone who has a propensity to drive a better health-related component or score. So, when you look at, again, all they know is history, right, with that individual, and when they can take in a much broader data set, they can sort of fill out that lens. So that's interesting. And then maybe just one more to touch on is we hear a lot about, and certainly this will affect the banking and industry as well, is this whole, we hear about the deprecation of the third-party cookie, which is taking place. And so, the banks and financial service industry spends $14 billion a year on ad tech, on digital advertising, and that's going to grow to about 20 billion a year through 2023. And so one of the deprecation of that third-party cookie presents some real challenges. So what we see from a use case is organizations, anyone that advertises is really trying to make the most of the first-party data that they have. So if they can enhance and enrich the customer data that they have, they can use this as a hedge and even through sort of data collaboration with like brands. So when I can't target cookies for advertising behavior out there, sort of cross-site tracking, they know they're gonna lose reach. So if they can sort of double down on precision and contextual relevance through understanding and being able to target individuals, but be more contextual about it. So as they lose that reach, they might improve on the precision. So that's a big trend. Almost everyone with a big consumer database is trying to enhance that first-party data. They're trying to unify and link prospective customer and core data together. They're trying to improve the recognition of a customer as they engage with the brand. All of these things that provide that enhancement, really, I think, and they believe, in the studies show, it just improves understanding, it reduces friction, it affects lifetime value, all of these things that, like I said, through market conditions that present challenges today.
Right. As they work with their advertising teams, how do I maximize that? And Steve, the next question is really for you about, from your experience, what do you see as opportunities for marketing and content teams such as those to get their message out and above the noise? And how does really data play a role in doing that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I think there's a couple things. One is, think about your relationship with your customer again through the lens of the customer and their journey. It's not as linear as it was in days past. People always talk about like the marketing funnel. I don't believe the funnel exists anymore. I think it's much more of a, if you think about, I've got a dog who likes to wander and sniff things. Like, I think it's more like a meandering journey than it is like a straight line funnel, down. So if you think about the way that consumers interact, with your companies or with your brands, from, kind of top of the funnel, just being exposed to the brand through acquisition, through, kind of upsell, cross sell, kind of all the way through through that journey. If you think about the opportunities to both activate and collect data, I think are really important. So again, top of the funnel, where you don't know much about that consumer, that's where, third-party data sources and other kind of alternate data sources can really play an important role in terms of whether it's creating audience segments based on kind of best customer behavior or things like that, so you can target your advertising more effectively at the top of the funnel. But as they become customers, being able to collect more first-party data from those customers and then supplement it with, alternate data sources, to kind of give you a more robust view, back to what we were talking about at the beginning about understanding them, outside of the four walls. That's where alternative data sources, or even, there's a new term out there called zero-party data. That's basically, it's a form of first-party data, but it's it's self-declared data from the consumer that's much more about like their preferences and interests and intentions. So you can use that type of data source as well. So again, understanding that journey and then looking for opportunities to kind of activate or collect data throughout that journey. But I think the other part that I think is equally as important, we're talking about a lot about understanding the customer and the data, but I think everybody really needs to be very thoughtful about what is that content that they're then going to be putting in front of those customers at those different points of the journey. I think sometimes people just get so kind of laser focused on better understanding the customer, but then it's like, but what are we going to tell them? Like, so I think there needs to be an equal balance in terms of, what is the messaging at each stage of the journey, and how do you kind of deliver, kind of better personalization at scale, as part of that journey. There's been a lot of studies that show that, kind of this concept of personalization at scale, if you can deliver on it, it's going to have a really positive impact on your business in terms of revenue growth, but it's also going to reduce a lot of your marketing operation costs as well, because you're eliminating a lot of waste that way too. So again, I think understand the consumer journey, look for ways to activate and collect data, but don't forget about the content as well. I think it's equally as important as you think about kind of your marketing and advertising efforts.
Yeah, and in content, in a broad gamut of a horizontal relationship with multiple milestones that you're trying to interact with the customer at the right time, at the right place. I really think that that's kind of a bridge of what I see happening is product managers really helping to bring the expertise of a product or a service to the marketing department and bond together to really kind of tackle that hyper-personalized message. So to really deliver on that personalization at scale that you mentioned, because that's just a point of real challenge, I think, for some of the organizations that I've seen. So great insight, Steve. Thanks for sharing that. Sure. The next question that I have is really, we haven't talked about bad actors and data yet, and we'd really be remiss if we didn't do that. So, these bad actors that are spoofing and the phishing and the scamming and this unsuspecting consumers out of their data points. We hear about, scams all the time, and it's on an increasing basis, especially with COVID. And Jeff, you mentioned knowledge-based authentication, and that's really starting to prove it's just no longer effective. There's several use cases around identity resolution that we've been talking about, and we're going to keep talking about those in the Table Talk series as we get going here. But what insight is anyone able to provide about maybe work that Audience Acuity is doing to enable this authentication, what I'm going to call consumers behind the device regarding data and bad actors? And what's your view on synthetic identity?
I'm sure Crystal probably has a comment here, but one of the areas, so as we look to open up a practice area or have an offering to improve digital authentication, right? It's a big trend right now. It's a big space. I think when we talk about identity for fraud detection, it's typically sort of single points of. There's a lot of very good companies that provide this, to all kind of organizations today. And it's really about, hey, can I connect the dots between someone who's engaging with me and sort of validate that's who they are? And that's getting much more difficult today. People can, people can steal phones and swap out SIM cards and basically take control of your number. There's all kind of tactics out there that make fraud detection. So one of the concepts out there in this idea of sort of digital authentication is being able to sort of align or correlate as many touch points back to the consumer as possible. So like we said, in the knowledge-based authentication, which was, hey, tell me your pet's name or your mother's maiden name, or these sort of security-oriented questions. What we're trying to accomplish now is this ability to connect an IP address, a mobile ad ID, any number of personal identifiers that could be tied back to a person, but not just tied back to a person, but can be shown to be active in a very short window of time. So looking back of, hey, here's yes, this mobile ad ID, this mobile device ID is linked to this person, and that's deterministic. There's other pieces that are linked deterministically to them, but they're all active in a short period of time. That sort of enhances the possibility of improved, what we call digital authentication. But synthetic fraud's a big piece. I know Chris, from the data standpoint, is probably, synthetic IDs per se on our side help analytics because they're real stuff. But in the fraudster world, it's a big challenge. So
yeah, we have identity, and for us, an identity means we actually know this is a person, name and an address, something specific like that, as opposed to an identifier like a mobile ad ID, or even in the financial side, a social security number is just an identifier. It's not the actual name and address. You can link it to it, but I think that would be a similarity thing for it. So I always feel bad for financial and health institutions who have to go through annoying the customer through multi-factor authentication and things of that nature. But what else can they really do right now? There's not for it. On our side, we have the benefit of being able to remove things or not collect them whatsoever to prevent identity theft on our end. So, we don't accept social security numbers, driver's license numbers, account numbers, et cetera. We compartmentalize those identifiers away from the actual identity. So what I mean by that is, if you thought of an Excel spreadsheet, each tab of an Excel spreadsheet is a different data table for us. So we keep the names and addresses in one table, completely separated from the phone numbers in another table, which is then another table of email addresses, and another table has just the mobile ad IDs. You have to have all those tables and know the master key of the ID that we have that links them all together to be able to stitch them together, be able to link, this is Chris with his social security number or phone number or email addresses and all the identifiers. So as Jeff was alluding to, we do have financial institutions and health firms who use just compartments of what we need. So for instance, if all they're working with are mobile ad IDs, and I use that example with the Accenture one, we could identify, yes, this mobile ad ID has been active in the past X amount of days, and we have an actual ID on it. So it's it does belong to a person. They could take the next step and then say, we then confirm the name and address or something along those lines, but they would be different types of calls. So the one thing to make this work is for companies to not keep the golden record, for lack of a better term, all information like on one row in one central repository where it can easily be hacked and accessed. Getting this to the point where you can keep it a bit compartmentalized and have a unified ID across all the different components, and know that ID is the one that signifies when you put it together is the golden record. So the bottom line is, don't make it easy for the bad actors, in my opinion. It's keep sensitive data in one area, and make sure you're very cautious when you transfer it. Not all together. So if you need to transfer, do it in two sets. I'm going to transfer something to you now. I'll transfer something to you in an hour later, and it keeps it compartmentalized of that nature. So it's and same thing. One other thing I put in, we also require the same types of treatment in our agreements with our clients and our vendors, so that they will not send us data that way, so that it's not necessarily hijacked in transit, or even by just an employee on the other side who maybe IT forgot to turn off a particular site where the data was being housed, and somebody tunnels in and just grabs it like that, because they know how to put it back together. So we make sure we try and keep it all separate and do different ways that we use that data, so that synthetic IDs or synthetic identity theft even becomes much more problematic.
Yeah. Chris, I think we have to do a whole nother session just on that sending of data between vendors, because there's functional jobs and report transmissions and file transmissions that go all day long in the operations of a bank and an FI, and between their vendors. So we could probably spend a whole hour just talking about best practices there and grabbing maybe from some of the other industries that you've seen. But I think that's some great perspective. And just as a reminder, I'm going to do a quick time check. We're about 10 minutes from the top of the hour. I have one more question, but not seeing anything in the chat. So if you guys have questions, go ahead and drop those in there, and then we'll read those off as we get done with this next question. But I think this next one's really important because it's future forward looking. And we know that there's a lot of teams involved in building what I consider new solutions inside or across an enterprise, to ensure some level of future proofing of those solutions. And there's already all of this disparate data across all of these wide variety of providers that kind of Chris just talked about, right? And we're moving data transformational pieces and functional processes across the, this enterprise for an FI or within a solution provider. So what kinds of considerations are top of mind, Chris? Maybe this is for you when you think about the future of merging data with modern technology. We talked AI, machine learning. There's a lot of new tech coming in, and there's going to be a lot of transport of data to do that. Anything come to mind there?
Yeah, so it's a good one. The disparate data, if you think of them as silos, where like I give Excel tabs, different things, they're just different ones. The first step is really, for the future state, is everything's going to be about IDs. It's just a safe place to be. I mean, it's talked about all the time on Dole. Everybody has a customer ID, a loyalty ID, there's functional IDs, banking services. You have all the IDs that are out there, and transforming those through different data schemas into a single common schema is really where we're at today. And it doesn't have to be, there's other schemas can still work. Even in our own firm, we have financial reports on our side that are completely different than the schemas on the data side, right? But we still get them into a business intelligence platform so that we can talk intrinsically about what's the value on our side of our own data, right? What data we're using, what are we not, and costs, and trying to tie those things across the enterprise in a multitude of ways. But the thinking of it for the future on the consumer side is things we were just talking about today. Are consumers going to be engaging more and more by apps, and then even on the financial service side, apps of those apps? And I'm thinking like Venmo and Cash App and all these other things, taking advantage of those types of things in the banking industry. So if data is being shared across platforms, and again, probably by IDs and some kind of type of hashing going to be going on for that. What's the minimum tolerance that a company is really going to have for sharing types of information? And I'll use this as for instance, on financial services side, we'd see firms working with, instead of just they have IDs, which stands for an individual, but then they aggregate things into a zip 9 or a zip 11. So a zip 9 being the 5-digit zip plus integer plus 4. The zip 11 would be the same thing, the zip plus 5, the plus 4. And then you have a 2-digit code, which signifies a delivery point. And that's been used a lot in place of names and addresses. And companies can certainly work with that. And if you're not working with something like that, what are you using? I think when you get to, or what do you intend to use, is just an ID. Answering that question, I think, identifies what's your next step in the future state. What are you going to do? It's easy if you're just going to ingest your own data and work within your walls. But as soon as you make the commitment that you're going to work with third-party data, whether it's an identity graph like Acuity has, or another platform data and types of sharing, could be a financial services firm that just is aggregating card transactions into categories for somebody. Once you get to that point, it's how are you going to be communicating with that? And it's somewhat of an enterprise-wide decision that needs to be made again. And just starting there, if you get to the point of the data is going to always exist, the tech is going to always exist. How do you operate between them? And I go way back, beginning of the call where I said it's really essential, in my opinion, that operations, IT, and the revenue strategy team all have this discussion and develop a plan together for that in terms of what is it that they plan to do in the next 3 to 5 years with this new world, and taking advantage of it. Because as you mentioned, Connie, there's a ton of data out there, and you can get at it in a variety of ways. And Steve, talked about the zero party type data. There's a wealth out there, and taking advantage of it is really just a matter of what can release from our walls, or what do we have to bring in to connect it within our walls. So and answering that question amongst those 3 disciplines, operations, IT, and revenue, should drive the development plan future.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, because you're talking enterprise level decisions, multi-team decisions, strategy, really all about data and how data is going to impact your revenue forecasting and your products that you're bringing to market. And, one of the things that Kelly and I have seen in, just our work and, here at Kairos is that there's a bottleneck happening even with just fintechs. I'm hurrying to try and integrate new solutions to keep up with the products and services that are outside of my customer product suite. But I also need to be aware of maybe the technical debt that I'm taking on for my data strategy. So I think that's what I heard you say, Chris, and thank you. That was a great answer. Okay, so we have a few minutes left. I know we started a couple of minutes. So if some folks wanted to stay on to ask some questions, we're certainly open to, you can unmute your lines and ask any questions, and we'll take those now. Or you can send them in the chat too. So we covered a lot of ground today, and I think this was just the first of what we have planned for continuing this data talk. We'll probably carve off pieces of what we touched on today in these broader questions. Anybody have any questions?
You all did such a wonderful job that there's just silence. But that's okay too. You guys can always follow up with us through email as well. I know it's a lot to digest. If you have some takeaways once you think about how it applies to your business, feel free to drop us an email or give us a call. We could certainly answer some questions after the fact as well.
Absolutely. And again, thanks to the panels. As we kind of wrap up today, we're going to go ahead and stop the recording here. We'll get this recording out to anybody that had a conflict. I know, Kelly, you had a whole list of people that, had a conflict today, but,
Had 11 people. It's crazy. It was a busy day, I think.
Yeah. So, and we're thinking, we'd love to spend some time, one day a month, or one day, every other month on data talk, hopefully just opening up the forum for some collective collaboration. It's certainly what Kairos is all about. Forming a community that's really focusing in on, this particular session and this topic. So
yeah, so drop us a line on that too. Yeah, if you guys are really interested in that and you want to be, part of it, we could certainly send you through our community text and let you know every time one of these is coming up. But we'd love to hear some feedback as to whether, you'd like to see something monthly on data, if there's some additional topics you'd like for us to host. We plan on doing these, as often as possible. So we want to get the data out to you guys. So just let us know what you're looking to see.
And we hope to keep Jeff and Chris very busy, and Steve as well. So, all right. So Kelly, I think we have one more slide, and it's just a little just reminder of what Kairos time is always about. And, just going back to the weaving of threads, and, we're certainly doing that in our businesses with every decision that we make. Some of those things we do very strategically planned. Some of them we hope that data leads the way. Just leads the way into that strategy, but may we always be available to those Kairos moments when action's required. So love that quote. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. And with that, we will conclude today's session right at the top of the hour.
Great.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
Connie.
Have a
Thanks,
wonderful
everybody.
week.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it's a pleasure.